I started to feel like Elevenlabs was getting a little bit too expensive for what I needed, so I went looking for alternatives, and I found one, Speechify. It is not as polished as Elevenlabs, but it is a lot cheaper and it has some pretty cool features. In this video, you'll hear how it sounds, how to use it, where it wins, and where it doesn't. Speechify is pretty cool. First of all, it is a lot cheaper, where 1 hour of audio costs around $5 on the cheapest model on Elevenlabs. On Speechify, it costs 50 cents. There's no subscription required here. You get exactly the credits you pay for, and you are not penalized if you use it a lot by having to upgrade your subscription or anything like that. There's also some other cool stuff that you can do with Speechify. You have some control and stuff like that, but we are going to talk about that a little bit later. But for now, let's go and play around with the voices so you can hear how they compare. So what I've done here is that I've taken a text from Alice in Wonderland, and we are comparing the Flash model on Elevenlabs versus the English model on Speechify. The reason I selected the Flash model is this is typically the model you would use if you're doing shorts for YouTube or stuff like that, right? I have found some male voices and some female voices that are somewhat comparable, and then we can hear how they sound on each platform here.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head.
What I'm thinking when I'm hearing this is that they are pretty comparable. Elevenlabs might be a little bit better, but I don't think it's 10 times as good. They are pretty comparable. We haven't played around with the emotions here or the stability and speed. I just quickly want to show you how the emotions work so you can hear the difference. So if we take Erica, for example, and this is the default one again.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?"
If we set the emotion to be terrified, for example.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head.
If we set something like energetic.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head.
Yeah, so that changes the delivery of the text here. In the playground, we can only set the emotion for the entire text, but when we get into the API, I'll show you how to do this on a word per word basis if that's something you want to do. Okay, so let's talk about voice cloning. On both Elevenlabs and Speechify, you can clone your voice in 2 ways. You can speak into the microphone for 10 to 20 seconds, or you can upload a longer audio clip to the platform and use that to clone your voice. I have done both on both platforms, so we are going to test that. When it comes to models, we are going to mainly focus on the Flash model since this is the most comparable in cost. We also have this one, which Elevenlabs recommend you use for voice cloning, at least for my voice. I'm not sure if it's the same for everyone. On Speechify, we just have 2 models. They are both same cost. One is the recommended one here, Simple English, and then we have the multilingual one, which I'm going to use because I think this works a little bit better for my voice. When it comes to the stuff you can adjust, we have these 3 here on Elevenlabs. If we use the multilingual model, we can also play around with the stylic saturation, which for my voice actually works very well. On Speechify, we can play around with the emotion and then the pitch and the speed. So with that out of the way, I am going to read this out aloud, and then I'm going to play these voices for you, one for each model and one for each platform. So this is my voice, my real voice. She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head. And let's start with the 10-second clip on Elevenlabs.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, which way, holding her hand on the top of her head.
And on Speechify, the 10-second voice.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, which way, holding her hand on the top of her head.
To me, this one gets closer to how I sound, but let's try the 10-minute clone here. And here it recommends the other model, but we are still going to use the flash one for now.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, which way, holding her hand on the top of her head.
The audio is not as good here. I'm not really sure why, but let's hear how it sounds on Speechify.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, which way, holding her hand on the top of her head.
Yeah. Again, this really depends on your voice. It depends on if you have an accent, how fast or slow you speak, the tone of your voice, and a lot of other things. So this is definitely something you want to go in and play with yourself to figure out which one is the best, if this is something you're going to use. I just quickly want to show you the multilingual one here, even though it is double the cost, so 20 times as expensive as Speechify. I found that setting the exaggeration to around 50% and using the 10-second audio clip is typically what will get me what I think is the closest to how I sound.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, which way, holding her hand on the top of her head.
So yeah, on Speechify, what we can play around with is the emotions. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can play around with this, and sometimes, depending on the text, you might get a little bit closer. But I haven't found that using a specific emotion always gets a better result. So here we are in N8N, and I just quickly want to show you how you can use Speechify in your automations. So Speechify doesn't have N8N doesn't have a node for Speechify. So what we'll have to do here is we'll have to use the HTTP request node. And to set this up, it's super simple. You want to select the method, set that as post, and then you want to put in this URL right here. This is from the API documentation, but I'll also put this in the description below. And then for the authentication, you can either just send it as headers by putting in bearer here and then your key, or you can create a generic saved credential type by clicking on authentication and then generic, and then you want to select bearer and you want to select create new. Maybe you want to rename this, paste in your token here and save it, right? So this is what I did, and I have that here. The minimum that you have to send, which by the way you should send as JSON, and you can send it either as fields or as a raw JSON, but the minimum you'll have to send is first of all the input. And let's just grab this here again and put that in. And then you will have to select the voice. So for this, you'll put in voice ID, go over to Speechify, click on voices, and then you want to find a voice. So let's say Christy here. And you want to click on the ID, which will copy it, and then you can paste that in. So this is the bare minimum, and when we execute this, what will happen is that we will get this audio data. Now, in order to use this, we will need to convert it. So if we go and we search for convert to file, and then select the move base 64 string to file, then all you got to do is you got to take the audio data, put that in the input, and then execute it, and you will get an audio file. But as you can see, this is a WAV file. It's a pretty big audio file. And so we can put in another parameter here, which is called audio format. And in the audio format here, we can put in MP3. And by doing that, what we'll get when we run this is an MP3 file. So much smaller file, and we can hear it directly inside N8N.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, which way?
Okay, so this is the basic, right? At this point, you can send this over to FFmpeg, to Whisper. You can do whatever you would do as if it were a Elevenlabs node you had in here. But there is one more thing we can do, and that is the emotion control. So this is using something called SSML, and the way that works is, if you are familiar with HTML, this will not look that weird to you. But basically you have some tags. So this is an opening tag and this is a closing tag. And then inside this speak tag, then we have a style tag, Speechify style, emotion, relaxed. Then we have a closing tag for the style. Then we have a break time. Then we have another style, which is an energetic emotion. Then we have this here, which doesn't have any style to it. This is if you want to control the pitch, the rate, and the volume, then you can also do that. But if I delete that, and if we run this and convert it to a file.
She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head.
So, I mean, this is pretty basic emotion styling, but as you can hear, this is where you can really start to get some interesting things out of Speechify. And the cool thing about this is that an AI totally understand what SSML is, so you can prompt it to give you an output like this. The only thing you want to be really careful about when using Speechify is that it can only use these 13 emotions here. You will find these in the documentation under SSML, and then down here under parameters. So copy these, give it to the AI and say that it can only use one of these. It should not come up with anything else, because if it does, it will not work. So in an attempt to give you some kind of conclusion on this video, I made this scorecard here. And starting at the top, we have quality. And they were pretty comparable when we were comparing the Flash model and the Speechify. But I still think most of the times Elevenlabs is just that little bit better. And therefore, I will say that Elevenlabs is the winner when it comes to quality, but not by much. Voice cloning, I think this depends a lot on your voice, but for me, from what I've heard, I think Speechify got the closest, and therefore I would say that Speechify, for me, and when we're talking about voice cloning, is the winner. Emotion is difficult here, because emotion on Elevenlabs it's not something you control, and it's really a hit or miss. Sometimes it sounds really good, and sometimes it just sounds weird. On Speechify, by default, there isn't really that much emotion. It does sound a little bit flat. So I would probably say this is a tie. If I had to choose a winner, I would probably go with Elevenlabs, but I will set this as a tie. Now, for the ease of use, Elevenlabs is easier to use because you don't have to worry. You just have to put in the text and then hope for the best, right? In order to get a good result on Speechify, you will have to use SSML and use these emotions and things like that. So therefore, Elevenlabs is the winner when it comes to ease of use. However, when it comes to control, this is where Speechify really shines, because you have that granular control. You can control sentences, you can control single words, you can control pauses, emphasis. You can really control a lot with the SSML system there. So the winner is definitely Speechify. You can also use a little bit of control in Elevenlabs, but you cannot control emotions, for example. That is simply not possible. Ease of use inside N8N, that's the same. I mean, sure, you have to put in an extra step in order to get a file, but yeah, this is such a small thing that I will give it a tie in this case as well. Finally, we can talk about price, and here there is really no question that the winner is Speechify. Even if Elevenlabs is better at some points, Speechify is so much cheaper. It is at minimum 10x cheaper and at maximum over 20 times cheaper. And that is not even considering that on Elevenlabs you often will lose some of the credits that you already paid for due to the fact that you would have to upgrade your plan when you're getting close to using all your credits, and then you'll just have a bunch of credits that you might not never use, right? So when it comes to price, Speechify is the definite winner. So this leaves us with 2 wins to Elevenlabs, 3 wins to Speechify, and 2 ties. So in my very unscientific comparison here, I will say that Speechify is the winner. But again, it really depends on what you are going to use it for. If you need perfect voiceovers for professional content, then you probably want to use Elevenlabs, and you probably want to use one of the more expensive models. But if you want to save some money, or if you are on a tighter budget, if you need like a ton of audio for stuff where it doesn't have to be perfect, that could maybe be blog posts that should be read up, or it could be, app content or short videos, then you definitely want to use Speechify, right? And also, if you want that granular control where you can control single words or sentences, again, Speechify is what you want to do. So for me personally, I'm still using Elevenlabs for some projects, but Speechify is so much cheaper and it's good enough that I use it for whatever I can, right? I use it a lot more than I use Elevenlabs. So with that said, I just want to thank you for watching this video. I would love to hear your comments on what you think about Speechify in comparison to Elevenlabs. But if nothing else, I will just see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.